Come join Melissa and her guests on the Chats from the Blog Cabin podcast. From North Carolina, this podcast will have you feeling like you've known these folks for years. Listen in as they chat about life, culture, current events, and more, all with a special Southern flair. Curl up with your favorite beverage and get ready to be entertained. Tune in now for a unique experience that's fun and insightful.
Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Chats from the Blog Cabin, the show where I virtually invite people into the blog cabin to chat about life. And today we are chatting about love, imperfect love, the messiness of love, everything about love. And joining me is the author of The Joy of Imperfect Love, Dr. Carla. And Carla is what I'm going to call you from now on. Welcome to the show. And before we get into talking about love, tell us a little about yourself.
Well, I am many things. I am a mom. I am a dog mom. I am a wife. I am a clinical psychologist. I'm a yoga teacher, a meditation leader. I am creative. I am fun-loving. I'm an introvert and a gardener, a wannabe artist. So many things make me me.
What really gets me is when you said introvert, because when we first hopped on, that was not what I thought when I saw you. I thought, oh, she's so fun. She's so loving. She's like so happy all the time. Extrovert right there. And, a lot of people would think that about me too. And I'm an introvert as well.
Isn't it interesting that we tend to think of an introvert as someone who's necessarily reclusive or standoffish? And I really like the definition of introverts and extroverts as being, where do you find replenishment? Find replenishment in quiet times, in more solitary times. You're more likely an introvert. And the more on that spectrum that you are, the more introverted you are. The extrovert, on the other hand, really gets replenished by being out with other people and engaging with other people and being the host or the hostess, those things. And so I think we do tend, as you said, we tend to think that the introvert must not be very happy or upbeat or joy. But I am definitely an optimist and joyful and upbeat, most of the time. But it's my quiet time that allows me to be that way.
Yeah, for sure. You have to recharge. Now, what made you decide to write your book, The Joy of Imperfect Love? Because honestly, I think it's a book that everybody needs to read, because there's so many facets of love. It's not even funny.
In my work as a human being, I've had quite a journey, and I expect that journey to continue till the day, I'm no longer on the planet, because there's so much to learn about love and life. And my first 3 books I was called to write them for different reasons. The first was Joy from Fear, and then Aging Joyfully, and then Date Smart. And each one felt as if I was being asked to write something, not only on behalf of clients and groups that I run, but also on behalf of whatever, let's call it the divine, was saying, hey, this is what you can offer to the world right now. This is what's important right now. And my books are also, I make sure that every one of them has exercises in it. Why do I do that? Mental health problems are on the rise. Many people can't access or afford psychotherapy. And so my books, each one of them comes with exercises, because I think that there are so many great self-help books out there, but we read them and we're like, oh, this is great concepts. And then we put it down and we go on with our lives. We don't have a way to rewire the brain to really go deeper. And so that is a big part of what I feel like I'm called to do, is to offer books that if somebody allows, they can read it at a more superficial level, or they can really work it. I've had people tell me they've read my books 3 times and have come out each time with a different message. I've had people say, first started it, I could only read the first 3 chapters. It was too much. And then I was able to pick it up 6 months later, and wow, it is exactly what I needed. So that's why I wrote The Joy of Imperfect Love. I just kept getting messages over and over again from clients, from the public, saying, my home life is broken. My romantic relationship, my relationship with my kids is not what I want it to be. My relationship with my parents, with my friends. And it kept coming back to love. We aren't educated in how to love well in many cases. And so I wanted to create a book that's approachable, that feels like a good friend holding your hand and taking you along that journey.
Yes, and There's one of the things that I love how you started out in the book, how you have to learn to love yourself before you can love others. And I think a lot of that, a lot of people, that's where a lot of our problems with mental health happen, is our self-love. We're not allowing ourselves to love ourselves. We're so down and we have that script in our head that we're writing that we're so negative right there on us.
And you hit it so beautifully, that self-love. For my podcast, Imperfect Love, my little tagline is, you don't need to love yourself perfectly to love others well. And the reason I emphasize that is self-love is a work in progress. So I don't need to be the perfect Carla and love myself perfectly. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to love my kids, my hubby, my dog, or any of my friends or family. What we want to do is to be able to say, I'm working on loving myself. I'm working on knowing myself. I'm working on evolving. And when we take that attitude of, throughout the book, I talk about polishing the stone of who you are. When we look at it like that, like, today I'm going to polish this part of who I am. Today I'm going to polish that part. And we don't have to get it perfectly because we never will. And some people think that self-love is a luxury or that it's selfish because they confuse it with self-care, but self-care is also not a luxury. Self-love and self-care are musts. They're not selfish. It is that part of, if we know who we are and care for who we are, we would a plant in a garden. We're going to be able to show up better in the world for ourselves and other people.
That is so true. And a lot of times people don't think that that's important, to show ourselves love and to show ourselves grace. Like when we make a mistake, we are so busy beating ourselves up when we make a mistake instead of saying, hey, this happened. I'm going to feel the feelings for the moment, but then I'm going to get up and I'm going to move on, and I'm not going to let it define who I am as a person.
That is such a good point about limiting beliefs, that when we are hard on ourselves, and this is how the book starts, actually, it starts from a paradigm of attachment theory, where I help people understand, if you have an inner critic, if you have hard time loving yourself or loving others, it doesn't mean you're broken. It's not your fault. It's not your parents' fault. We want to get into the shame blame game. We just want to look and say, I probably either grew up in a household where there was not secure attachment, so I'm insecurely attached, or I've had trauma in my history or in my adult life, so as a childhood history or adult history, and it's getting in the way of forming safe, secure relationships, really showing up for myself and other people. When we understand that, and understand that we can reprogram our brains, we can work through the trauma, we can earn secure attachment. And I love attachment theory. And even though it's kind of a buzzword lately, people talk about attachment theory, it's been around since the 50s. And it is one of the most well-researched longitudinal, the longitudinal studies in the field of psychology. And it just helps us understand the intergenerational transmission of patterns. And if they're healthy, wow, that's terrific. We grow up with healthy communication and healthy love for self and others. But many people didn't grow up with that. I didn't grow up with that. And so what we need to do then is realize, wait, I can earn this. This is something just like a muscle. I can work this muscle and I can earn secure attachment. And so the book helps us. That's where it starts from. Learning how to earn a secure attachment within the self so we can love ourselves, love others, have boundaries with those who don't love us, deserve to be loved, have new communication standards, new verbal agreements with people, new agreements with ourselves about what we deserve and what we want. So I try and make it a stepwise approach because it can be daunting. I've been working on myself for a really long time, and I want the listener, today's listeners, to feel like, I can do this. It's not going to be something I go to a therapy visit and do overnight, or read a book and do overnight. Wait a minute, I can just do this and do it like I would any practice, right?
Yeah.
A practice of learning to knit or garden or do yoga or ballet or whatever it is. Those are practices, and self-work is a practice. That's all it is.
I like how you just said that you've worked on yourself for a long time, because a lot of people think that once you get to a certain age, you just stop learning. And I think that that's where a lot of our negative scripts come in, is because we stop learning and we stop thinking, and we're stop evolving. And so we're like just stuck.
Oh my goodness. I'm so glad you brought that up, Melissa. It is basically the essence of my first and second, of course, this book, that I don't talk about myself much because it's not about me, it's about other people, but I am really clear with people that I took a very linear path at first in my life because I did what I was told to do, what I thought I should do, what I thought would make my family love me, and all of these things. And there was a day where I said, no, I'm not doing this. I can't do it anymore. I can't. My body can't. My mind can't. And I'll tell you what, my growth trajectory since then, even though, of course, I'm older than when I was
Mhm.
10, 20, 30 years ago. Oh my goodness, the growth that comes when you finally start breaking free of the I shoulds, I have to, I
Mhm.
must, and going into that place of, this is what's right for me. And listeners, if you're doing what's right for you, you might think, oh, that's a horrible way to think. You'll harm your kids, you'll harm the world. No, if you're really in tune with your moral compass, with your
Mhm.
soul's calling, what is right for you, oh my goodness, you can't get it wrong. You will make wobbles, you'll make mistakes. But when your moral compass is true north and you keep following that, you're going to be a light for everyone
Everyone.
into contact with you, because they're going to see you being your best self. There's no downside to that. That's not selfish. That is showing up. If you have young kiddos and they're watching mama or dad go, yes, this is what I really need to do. This is, it's maybe not the profession that makes the most money, but it allows me more work-life balance, or more time with my kids, or more of a sense of who I am, or whatever it is that you need to do or want to do to love yourself, your kids, you're going to be the most radiant light. And if you don't have kids, be that most radiant light for yourself or your partner or your coworkers. That's what the world needs. More people following true north.
And I will attest to that, that is so true, because I was just like you. I did what everybody else wanted me to. I was so bogged down with all this judgment on me. Then finally, when I turned 50, I was like, you know what? I can't do this anymore. I have to start doing other things. And within the last 4 or 5 years, my girls have even said, my girls are young adults now, but they've all even said they've seen the change in me. They've seen how different I am now. I'm not as hard to get along with as I was before, because I don't have all that pressure on me anymore.
And I bet you're a fabulous role model that they just cheer you on and say, way to go, mama, way to go. And that's what we do when we start allowing in
Mhm.
true selves, our imperfect selves, and the ones that say, I'm going to show up and I might not walk that line of perfection or perceived perfection, but there is no such thing as real perfection. We look out at nature, and I haven't run across one person to date who says, oh, that tree's imperfect, that bird's imperfect, that robin, its feathers aren't exactly the right color. No, if we use nature as a model and say, wait a minute, there's nothing perfect in nature, yet we find it glorious. We find it glorious because it is wabi sabi beautiful. And when we allow ourselves that same right, we don't look, I'm looking right now at an oak tree, and it's got to be 50 years old, right? I'm not looking at it going, oh, that's an ugly old oak tree. It's got moss on it, and it has wrinkles. No, I'm looking at that lovely oak tree and saying, it is a work of art. And we start programming our brains to see how much society has programmed us to yearn to look perfect, to be this tall, this much on a scale, this color hair, this look. If somebody wants to pursue that, that's fine. I don't judge it, but we don't have to. We shouldn't feel that we
Yeah.
must do that. And that's what's really happening with our kiddos these days. They're being raised to believe that they should look perfect. And that's a big yoke, or that their academics should be perfect.
Mhm.
career should be perfect. And it's a stressful enough world without feeling as though perfection is the North Star, because it's not. And I was doing a talk yesterday on perfectionism, and somebody asked, well, why is perfectionism bad? And I said, well, it orients us. The short answer is it orients us to look for flaws.
Mm.
And that's not how I want to see the world. I don't want to go through the world looking for flaws everywhere, in my partner, in myself, in my kids, in my work. Yes, there are times we want to be mindful of details. Like when I put a book out into the world, I go crazy with my editors and publisher to make sure it's as error-free as possible and as clear as possible. But that's, a teaching for other people, and I want them to be able to understand it and read it. But when we turn that lens of harshness on ourselves or the people in our families, often because it was something we learned in childhood where we were really criticized, it sets us up to just go through life in such an anxious and stressed state. And that's where the joy of imperfect love comes from, that title, when we allow ourselves to make space for our own differences and others and imperfections. That's where joy starts growing. Because I'm not saying, listeners, that we allow anyone to treat us in toxic ways. This is not permission to be toxic to people. This is permission to allow for people's quirks, to allow for each of us to have our own roads in life, and to work on being our best selves just a tiny bit every day.
Yes, I totally 100% agree. We need to take a brief commercial break, but we'll be right back.
The threats women face today are unparalleled and even more dangerous than ever before. 1 in 3 women globally has been the victim of an assault. Women are terrified, and they are looking for answers.
In the book, Street Smart Safety for Women, we draw on our experiences, both personal and professional, to provide those answers. It's by women, for women. Street Smart Safety for Women is available wherever books are sold.
And we are back with Carla. And Carla, we had such a great conversation, but I would love for you now to read a part of your book. And I'm going to actually hide myself, so I give you full attention. So it's to you. Read part of your book, The Joy of Imperfect Love.
Absolutely. So this is from the beginning of actually chapter 4, Imperfectly Loving Yourself from the Inside Out. Loving your imperfect self is a process. As you come to know and accept your imperfect self, a true sense of self-love begins to form. Self-love isn't a given. It is grown on a strong foundation of compassion and self-esteem. Self-love is an equalizer. It is not dependent on external factors such as appearance or material wealth. Self-love is available to anyone willing to undertake the lifelong process of delving within to foster positive acceptance and change. Your self-love will naturally expand and grow as you work to hone your strengths and shore up your imperfections. The self-love concepts in this chapter build on and interweave the foundational elements illuminated in prior chapters. You may now more fully appreciate the importance of intentionally coming to know and embrace the ideals and life choices that are right for your unique self. As you continue on the path of self-reflection, while also striving to make mindful, if imperfect, choices in life, you'll begin to feel stronger within yourself. Increased self-awareness will set the stage for stronger, more accepting self-love. This is one of the greatest gifts of the imperfect love journey. One of the most courageous things we can do is to accept our imperfections and let our imperfect selves shine. Being courageous is very different from being brave. Bravery involves facing danger or pain without fear. True courage allows us to move forward even when we are deeply afraid. By courageously embracing the truth that we don't need to be and actually can't be perfect in any area of life, the stressful illusion of perfection becomes a non-issue. When we accept the reality of imperfection, we are free to invest in our strengths while giving our weaknesses the support they often require. And so that's one of the beginnings of one of the chapters, chapter 4, that allows us to see that that platform of self-love is based on something simple, which is learning to self-reflect. And why is self-reflection important? Because it takes us out of that shame-blame game. When we do something, let's say we're having a conversation with our partner and it gets testy and it turns into conflict. So we might go away from that blaming ourselves or blaming a partner. But when we do that, there's no upside to it. We just get more polarized. But if we instead use that effort to go back in time and say, okay, if I were a fly on the wall and saw that conversation as a third party, what would I hear? What would I see? How could Carla be her best self? How might her partner be his best self? And just trying, and it's difficult because we have to put judgment away, just really back up. And then, and I do this myself. I do it when, something's happening in my life and I don't really like how it came out. And I think, okay, now what could I have done differently? If I call it in the Joy of Imperfect Love, I call it like the wise judge in the room. Bring in a wise third party when there's a conflict, and what would that person say or do? When we're able to back up, we might see something very simple like, oh, I used a very blaming message. Or, I didn't ask my partner if it was a good time for him to talk. Or I might say, I had a lot of resentment building up for my partner. It all flew out at one time. I might also say, you know what, honey, you were pretty darn hungry. And when you're hungry, you're not at your best self. So, next time you want to have a chat with your sweetheart, you better have, some protein beforehand and a cup of tea. Otherwise, so when we learn to do that, we get out of the blame game and we learn to look at what is going on inside the self. And sometimes there's nothing. Sometimes it was truly, the other person. Maybe they didn't eat. Maybe they were stressed. Maybe they're just in a bullish kind of mood. But then we can also go back by self-reflecting and look at our childhood and say, gosh, is this pattern something my mom and dad did? Or my caregiver, or my brother, or my sister? And we will often, when we back up, we'll go, uh-oh, I was doing exactly what my mom and dad did. So it's a fun process if you make it fun. It's fun. It can sometimes be painful, but it can also be fun.
I 100% agree. Do you think that that's the reason why a lot of people just want to give up? Because a lot of people get married very quick. They really don't know each other, and then they want to just give up.
Oh, it's such a good question, Melissa. And my husband and I were actually having this conversation last night, and he said, why is this person getting a divorce? They've been married 5 minutes. I said, I don't know. I don't know them well enough to know. I don't know anything about that. I said, but we grow up in a society where relationships are romanticized. People think Prince Charming and Cinderella were raised on this. We're raised on the Disneyland version of romance, and we forget that even our highly sanitized, romanticized fairy tales, there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes. And that is actually with Cinderella. That's not what the fairy tale was about originally. It was called Baba Yaga, and it was about doing the work so that the two parts of the self, the masculine and the feminine, get stronger. They marry and they go out into the world, and that strength allows you to live happily ever after. So why do marriages tend to fall apart, or relationships? We live in a quick fix world. We live in an instant gratification world. And I'm not saying divorce or ending a relationship is bad. There are times when it's toxic and you do want to get out and it's necessary to get out. But there are also many times when we want to realize that people are not disposable, kids aren't disposable, partners aren't necessarily disposable, and that love takes work. And especially if you're using a marriage, as many of us do, to be saved, to be safe, to be loved, and all of those things that you deserve. But if you haven't worked on your trauma, If you haven't worked on the issues in your past, you're just going to bring those things into your relationship. Now, I'm not saying, this is really important, that you can't work on yourself in a relationship. I actually think that if you have a good enough foundation and you're doing some work, our love relationships can be a proving ground and a great place to grow your self-love, your relationship love, your ability to be a steadfast partner and parent. So I do think our relationships can give us a big place for self-love and other love. But again, back to your question, I think sometimes we give up too easily. And my caveat is, as per your commercial where they were talking about abuse, somebody's being abusive. No, boundaries, strong, hard stop. But if things are, and I'm doing air quotes, just difficult, and sometimes they're really difficult, that can be a chance. You often hear when people are talking about the Chinese language that the symbol for crisis is the same as opportunity. And so when we are in that crisis, that dark moment in a relationship, if both partners can step up to the plate, and I'm emphasizing both, if both partners can step up to the plate and say, yeah, this is a crisis, but we're going to grow from this. We're going to learn to communicate through this. We are going to love stronger through this. Oh my goodness, the growth potential is amazing. Where this does not work, and I can't emphasize this strongly enough, I see it throughout the work I do. One partner cares and the other doesn't. One partner showing up and saying, I want this to work. I want to evolve. I want to love better. And the other partner saying, either I'm totally indifferent, or it sounds like a good concept, but love should be easy. Love should not take work.
Yeah.
And if that's your mantra, if somebody's mantra is love should not take work and I'm show up, I will often say it's like mountain climbing to the top of Mount Everest. And one person has their ropes and their ice pick and they're doing all the work, and the other person is either dead weight or worse yet using their ice pick to go down to the bottom of the mountain. And that's not fair. And that's a big piece in the later chapters of the Joy of Imperfect Love, the very real truth that love takes work, and it takes work. If we're talking romantic partners, it takes work from both partners.
For sure. And it's messy too. 100% messy.
Love is so messy. When you think about loving our kiddos and loving our parents and loving our partners, it's messy. It's sometimes a big old sloppy mud pit, and that's okay. Being in a mud pit, when we realize we're in a mud pit, sometimes that's the most difficult part, is if we realize we're in a mud pit and we're trying to stay all clean and perfect and pretend it's not happening. Sometimes we just have to dive into the mud pit with our partners and say, hey, hon, nice to see you here. Let's work this out. Let's work this out. We can get a nice shower afterwards, but let's work this out and stay in the mud until we're done.
Now, you mentioned the fairy tale of Cinderella, but do you think it's Hollywood's version of love, like the Hallmark movies and everything else, is detrimental to what people, when they go into marriage, what they think marriage is going to be about, what they think relationships are going to be about?
Absolutely. And I'm not blaming Hollywood. I'm not blaming romanticized fairy tales. I am saying that if you grow up in a healthy household, healthy enough, you likely saw your parents work through differences. You likely realized that love is a lot of work. It takes a lot of communication. It takes a lot of effort being on the same page. Now, the more you get used to that, the less work it is. Like any neural pathway, the more you do it, the more hardwired it is. So people who grow up in generally healthy households realize from the get-go that it's like having a garden, that you got to weed it. You have to weed it. It's part of it. For someone who's never gardened and has only seen apples pop up in a store and carrots pop up in a store, it's going to be very unfamiliar to go out there, pull the weeds, do the fertilizer, wash off the vegetables, watch them grow. That won't feel normal. When they see a fairy tale version of the carrots just popping up, like, oh, these perfect carrots and oh, this perfect relationship, they won't realize that it's natural, it's necessary. Why? when we know we must, Melissa, we know we must invest in life. We must invest in work. We don't just show up and sit there and go, I'll let my boss do the work. We have to invest in cooking. Even if we're going through a drive-through, we're still driving through the drive-through and paying money for it. We're investing. Life takes investment. Why, in heaven's name, would we ever think that love is any exception? This most sacred, huge part of our lives. Why would we allow ourselves to be tricked into believing that person meets person and they live happily ever after with no pain, no trauma, no sadness, no hurdles? Of course there are. It just depends on how we make it through them. Do we do it like pros or want to be pros? Do we really try our imperfect best, or do we act out? Do we quit? Do we throw in the towel when the going gets tough? And I think that is, a big point in the Joy of Imperfect Love, that I believe, Melissa, that one of the reason we are on the planet is to love. And to show love for self and others. I can't see any other reason to be here. I don't, coming onto the planet just to accumulate money or be a rock star, that would be meaningless if you didn't have love. Because if love was the answer, any person who had a big balance in their bank account would not, if money was the answer, any person who had a big bank account balance would be happy. Their mental health would be stellar. They'd be set. But it's not the case. And that's why you see with people who have love in their lives, who feel loved, who feel safe, who feel secure, sure, they need enough money to pay their bills and have medical care and food and clothing and shelter, but an excess of money isn't the answer. Love is the answer. Imperfect love, not perfect love, because it's all going to be imperfect.
I totally agree. And I think it's when you're down in the trenches with each other, that's when you learn to appreciate each other even more. And you kind of fall in love all over again, because you realize, hey, that is my person. That is the person that's going to be there for me through thick and thin, regardless of what's going on. And even though, like, most of the time, marriages and any relationship has their ups and downs, their peaks and valleys. And if anybody ever says their life is perfect, then they're telling you a lie, because honestly, there are ups and downs in every relationship. But it's only when we learn and we grow through those relationships, and our love grows exponentially when we go through all those turmoil.
I couldn't agree with you more. The bonding effect of going through, I was asked for my professional opinion on something called tenured friendships. Like, what's a tenured friendship? Tenured friendship is somebody who's earned a lifelong place in your heart, in your life, just like a tenured professor, right? And why is it? In most cases, our tenured friends have been through parts of life with us, not just the fun, the little trip here or the high school or this, that. They know us.
Mm-hmm.
They've been through our heartbreaks. They've been through our disappointments, our relationship breakups, our job falterings, whatever it was. It is those, yes, of course we remember the fun times, but we really remember, we are really bonded when someone is with us through thick and thin. And you hit that point, we often forget. And that's where the imperfect piece comes in. When we look at that, the term, it's kintsugi. When there's a broken vase and it's mended, I think it's a Japanese art, and it's mended with gold, and it's kintsugi. It's stronger when mended with gold than it was before. And to me, that's our relationships. If they're going to rupture, we're going to have breaks because we're imperfect. Life's imperfect. But how do we put it together? Do we leave it on the ground? Do we stomp on it and make it worse? Or do we say, let's mend this. Let's bring it back together. Let's make it stronger than ever. And I think that is a key. I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's so critical to remember. Yeah, this is tough. It's uncomfortable. It's difficult. But when we get out the other side, and I'm like you, when my partner and I make it through something difficult, that's when I respect him the most. Why? I know it's not his skill set. It is not his skill set. He does not like working through things. He's more the kind who would like rather just like move on and dispose of things. I mean, I have more respect for him when he does that than anything else he does.
Yep.
Because it's hard.
It is so hard. Now, you mentioned earlier about boundaries. Let's talk about how important it is to kind of going into a relationship, setting boundaries, and then even further on in the relationship, having boundaries.
Thank you for that. Boundaries. First, let's talk about boundaries quickly. Boundaries can be very porous, very rigid, or flexible. And ideally, we want to be able to have all three in relationships. Sometimes, with a partner and we trust them, our boundaries will be very permeable and porous. Like, we let people in, we allow ourselves to be very permeable. And sometimes our boundaries are rigid. If somebody asks us to go against something that really means something to us, we're going to say, hard stop, no. And then let's say in a work environment, we generally will have more rigid boundaries because we don't want to be, kissing and cuddling, people at work. We want to have nice, firm, strong boundaries. So it's clear that we're there for work. And of course, in our friendships, it'll be more permeable. We will have more fluid boundaries depending upon how safe we are with the person. Some people either have very rigid boundaries with everybody. No, hard stop. Nobody's getting close to me. Nope. No, lock is on the gate. No, you're not coming in. Mm-hmm. People have very porous boundaries where anyone can come into their lives. They'll do anything for anyone. And that's not healthy or safe because that person gets taken advantage of and likely has low self-worth, low self-esteem. So what we want to do is have boundaries that we can move appropriately for the situation. So that said, now let's look at relationships. Some people say, well, I don't have any boundaries. And that may be. If you did not grow up with being taught about boundaries, you likely don't have good boundaries. And again, that's not your fault. But what you can do is to learn to have boundaries. And I look at boundaries, and I talk about this in the book, as being like a fence. Your house, you have a key to your house of your front door. Some people give that key to everyone. They're like, okay, come on in. Here you go. Have a key to my house. I'll do anything to be loved. Mm-hmm. Some people won't give that key to anybody, and they put up big castle walls. Other people have, a nice picket fence, and people who can come in, they say, hey, come through the picket fence. I'll leave the door open for you, or they'll lock the door. That's how we want to start looking at boundaries. You have the right to create the kind of boundary system you want. And as you change and get stronger, if you've been boundaryless and people are used to coming into your house, taking whatever they want, I'm talking literally and metaphorically, then they're going to get upset, especially if they don't like change. If they don't want what's best for you, they're going to get upset when you start saying, wait a second, you can't talk to me like that. Or, no, that won't work for me. Mm-hmm. And they're going to be upset because they want you to be the old you. That's not your problem. They can want that all they want. Your work is to first know your boundaries. Know in every situation, and it'll take you some time to get used to it, what your boundaries are. Let's say you're used to volunteering for everything, and everybody's used to pressuring you. You'll do for everybody at your own expense. Then, as you begin to say, wait a minute, no, I'm sorry, that or won't do that. Another may push back. They may call your name, may distance you as a then to say, I'm holding to my back. This is what's working for me. And if someone continues to chew, then you can say again, no, thank you. Another, even if that is the Saturday or a walk, you don't need to.
So boundaries, how important are boundaries in relationships?
Boundaries are critical in our relationships because they allow us to let other people know and ourselves know what our needs are. They allow us to stand strong and firm in our truth. And so some people don't know what boundaries are because they didn't grow up with healthy boundaries. And simply put, boundaries, we can look at them like a fence that if we see ourselves as individual homes and we have this home of who we are, someone who doesn't have boundaries lets anybody into their home at any time and says yes, 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 bends over backwards, might, share inappropriately, things like that. Inappropriate actions often come with that. Then at the other end of the spectrum, and that's a person who has no fence, no key to their front door, nothing. The other end of the spectrum, we have the people who have very rigid boundaries in all situations. Nobody comes near them. They're highly defended. Think of that as a big castle wall and a moat. And then we have the person who has healthy boundaries, who knows that for some people, they can have a key to the house even. Some people need to knock. Some people, excuse me, will not get entrance at all, no matter what. And maybe they have a white picket fence that allows them to see what's happening. So we want to see boundaries as something that shift depending upon the situation. With someone who is very close and trustworthy, somebody who's earned our trust, they sure might have that key to our house. For someone who hasn't earned our trust, or we don't know, or somebody who's betrayed us, we may have very rigid boundaries and say, nope, nope, not getting a key to the front door, not coming in, nope, you're way over here. And so that's the part that if we didn't grow up with healthy boundaries being modeled, then we might really want to start from scratch and look at some of the people in our lives where we feel like we're taken advantage of, or we don't show up as our strong selves. And as we do that and start looking, we get to realize, well, what would I like to say to this person? What would I like to be doing? How would I like to be handling this situation? At work, I'm the person where the boss always gives me the project at the last minute, and I go, okay, no problem. But, I spend all weekend doing it, and my boss does that to me. Or I'm a member of this committee, and I'm always the one who gets all of the extra tasks. Or my kids are constantly, even though they're grown, they're constantly taking advantage of me and coming to me for money. And even when they have their own money and whatever it is, so you might go, oh, okay, I see these boundary issues. So how in each of those situations can I know my truth and stand in my truth? As I say, learn to stand in your truth with courage, dignity, and respect. As you're learning this process, it's going to be hard. It's not easy. It's actually really hard work. Because, oh my goodness, because people who are used to you being a doormat will want you to stay a doormat.
Yeah.
They like you that way. So as you learn to stand up for yourself, they're going to try to get you back into the doormat position or the people pleaser, quiet one. And some people might even start calling you names, saying, oh, aren't you the aggressive one? Aren't you a bully? And as you might just be being assertive. And people don't like people who are assertive. And assertive simply means you're stating your truth kindly and with grace. And some people don't like that. So as you practice this, sometimes it's really fun to do it in a mirror and to imagine a situation where you didn't stand up for yourself or didn't speak your truth. So you look in the mirror, talk to a friend, or maybe to your partner. If you have good boundaries with your partner, maybe you're working with a friend on how to talk to a partner who doesn't have good boundaries. And you're practicing what it feels like to say, no, I won't do that. I'll do this instead. Or no, that won't work for me. Or thank you for the offer, but I'm not available. And you don't have to give excuses. You don't have to say that you don't want that extra assignment. You have the right to simply say, no, thank you. Or maybe you go to a family gathering and everybody's asking you questions about your personal life and you're tired of it and you don't want to. You get to say, I'd rather not talk about that. Thank you for your interest. Let's talk about your next vacation instead. And as you really make those strong stands, you will feel stronger. You will feel better. It's just an amazing process.
It is. I've gone through that process 100%. It is an amazing process, but you're right. The other person will not they will not respect your boundaries, and they will try to push those boundaries to try to get you to react. And it's all you can do to just kind of hold on to your and learn to not respond in the moment. Sometimes you have to take a breath and you have to walk away and then maybe come back later and respond.
Melissa, that's such a good point, because I have sort of a 3 strikes policy with that. If I'm stating a new boundary, especially when I was very new at it, I realized some people were actually dumbstruck. So me setting a boundary for the first time, they were going to test me again, right? They're going to test again. So then that was the second time. I'd say, okay, I guess I wasn't clear enough, or maybe you didn't take it in the first time. Here's my boundary around that. And then depending upon the person and the nature of it, if it's something toxic and severe, they might not get to a third time. And the third time is, wait a second. I said this. Now here's the last time. If you can't respect my boundary, and this is where it gets even harder, then you realize you have to put in a consequence. And it might be something like, I'm going to discontinue the relationship, or I'm going to take a step back from the relationship, or I'm going to leave the family gathering, and because this kind of behavior is, untenable for me, whatever it is. But that's where we want to really be prepared. What are we willing to do to honor our boundaries? And sometimes it's hard when you're surrounded by good people who truly want what's best for you. They usually get it on the second time. Some of them even get it the first time.
Yeah, but some of them still won't get it a second, our third, our fourth, our fifth, our sixth times, and you're like, I just have to hold you at arm's length, and they still don't understand. They still don't get it.
You're 100% right. There are people who will never get it. And that's that part where I talk about acceptance in the book and the power of acceptance. And that's that time when you have to accept that some people, there are a lot of ways to work with acceptance, but in what we're talking about now, there's a time where we have to say to ourselves, yeah, these people are not, or this person is not going to show up in a way that's healthy for me. They're not going to respond in a way that's healthy for me. I am unwilling to go back to the old behaviors because I like these new ones so much better. I feel so much stronger. And therefore, I'm willing to detach from that person. If they ever in a million years or 5 years or whatever do some work, come around and show me they can be trusted, then I can let them back in.
Yep.
But that might happen.
100%. Now, we talked about romantic love. We talked about self-love. Let's talk about love and the relationship in friendship, because like you talked about earlier, like you have that one friend that's ride or die that's been through everything with you, but then you have at the beginning, people are so scared to show our vulnerabilities with friends.
When we're afraid to show vulnerabilities in friendships, we want to look at why. Why is that happening? Is it some unresolved trauma in you, maybe from not trusting your family, or your family not being trustworthy as you're growing up? Is it something this friend has done that showed you at some point in time that they weren't trustworthy? Once you figure out what the roots are, that's where the self-reflection comes in. Then it's worth having a conversation with the friend to say, I'm working on, let's say it's the first case where you realize, oh, this friend truly is trustworthy. They do show up for me. I can be vulnerable with them, but I'm just totally defended. Then we can say to that friend, hey, you know what? I realize I'm doing some self-work. I realize I'm not the world's most trusted person. I've trusted all the wrong people and not the right people. I realize you're one of the right people to trust. Will you be patient with me as I work through this with you? Because I do want to deepen our friendship. So that's something you could say to the first kind of friend. If it's a friend, someone where you've had a falling out that was never healed, but that person is genuinely a good person. It was just one of those ruptures. We have ruptures with friends. And then you can go back to that friend and say, hey, again, I'm doing some self-work. I realize that we never healed this rupture and that I withhold from you because I'm afraid that that we're going to have another rupture. Can we talk this through and work on it because I want to be able to share with you the way I used to. And I realized I'm holding back, and I don't want to hold back from you. I want to share everything with you. And then, so that's an idea for that. And then you can work through. But you might have a friend, and I actually don't call these friends. I'm very strict with my definition of friends. And it's outlined in the book. I think friends, like people who say they love us, it's earned through behavior, through loving actions, not perfect actions. And that's a key piece in the book, that we all have the right to make mistakes because we're imperfect. But what we want to do is to be able to have someone or ourselves show up and say, wait a second, I made a mistake. I am so sorry. And I'll do it differently next time. And tell them how to do it differently next time. That's how we deal with mistakes. It's how I deal with mistakes. When I make a mistake, I reflect, I figure it out. If it was on me, I'll be the first to say, I'm sorry. Got this wrong. Here's how I'll do it differently. But if we have a friend, and so to me, that's what kind of the friendship is, this really deep mutual relationship where there's lots of trust and kindness, reciprocity. However, there are people who call themselves friends. They say, I'm your friend. I've known you for this long. Maybe they've known of us, but they don't really know us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Someone who we might have even dated, 20 years ago, and they say, oh, I've known you for 20 years. No, you dated me for a minute and you didn't even know me then.
That's so true.
And it could be the same with a girlfriend. But anyway, we also have people who call themselves our friends, but they're not there when we need them. We're there when they need us, but or they gossip about us, and we find out they're gossiping about us. And that's a big key piece of relationships. If somebody's gossiping to you about someone else, you could bet that they're gossiping about you when you're not present. And so that's that piece where I don't call those people friends. I call those people acquaintances. And I would hold them at arm's length, because to me, friendship is one of the ways we get to have love in our lives. And it may mean that you downsize your friend group. It may mean that you no longer think, oh, I have 365 friends because I have 365 friends on Facebook. Well, those are most likely acquaintances. And the research shows that we can have about 5 intimate relationships at one time. That's what the human brain can handle. And so when we look at that, I say friends, when they're showing us love and we're showing them love and working through our hardships, those are the gems in our lives, just like our other love relationships, whether they're romantic or with our kiddos. Those are the gems that we want to really hold on to and polish.
That is so true. Now, I hate that our time is almost up, but before we go, before we share where people can find you in your book, is there one little nugget that you want to leave us with? Either it's something that we touched on that you want to make sure that you got across, or something that we didn't touch on that you would like to share?
I think an important piece, because I'm getting so many inquiries about mental health issues skyrocketing, and I think that people are missing that perfectionism is a big piece of that. And here's why. Perfectionism suffocates the soul. It makes us constantly be critical, and the soul is not a critical aspect of who we are. The soul is very loving and forgiving. And I talk about this vulture on a wire, right? That we sometimes have this part of the self or someone in our lives who sits up on this wire and criticizes us, just waiting to swoop down. And that vulture on a wire can become something that lives inside of us. And social media, again, I'm not saying technology is bad. It's how we use technology that can be healthy or not healthy. So we want to be aware of anywhere in our lives, whether it's social media, whether it's television, whether it's a relationship, where something at work, where there's a force, and it can't be inside our own brains. If there is a vulture going on somewhere in our lives just waiting to pick on us, we want to become aware. And that it's likely after us to be perfect or to make somebody else perfect. And that creates stress, it creates anxiety, it creates depression. We only have 24 hours in a day. And what the soul wants for us is as much joy in those days as possible. They can still be hard. We can still, but we really try to cultivate joy. And one of the ways we can do that is to let go of this constant pursuit of having more outside, more stuff, more success, more this. Let's just turn it inward to ourselves and say, okay, if I'm going to have more of anything, let me have more loving kindness in my life. And I think that's one of the big keys to mental health.
I love that. If I can have more of anything, let me have more loving kindness. I think that's a perfect way to end this episode. Now, where can people find you?
My social media, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, X, is all at Dr. Carla Manley, and that's Manly. My website is Dr. Carla Manley. My books are on Amazon or through my publisher Familius, and my books are Joy from Fear, Aging Joyfully, Date Smart, and my latest baby that's right here, The Joy of Imperfect Love. I'm so excited. I have relationship cards coming out that are self-reflection oracle cards. And they are called, there's a prototype actually behind me up on the counter. You can't see them very well, but they're called the Imperfect Love reflection and oracle cards they're just so yummy. I love them. And so those will be out soon on Amazon.
Oh, wow. I can't wait to get those. They sound really great.
Oh, they're fun. Oh, and also my podcast, Imperfect Love, new episode drops every Friday. They're really fun. It's much like your platform where it feels like you're just having a chat with someone. It's not somebody forcing knowledge down, on you. It's just a lovely chat about common mental health issues, everything from narcissism to healthy eating and body issues. It's fun.
It's fun. I love that. So, Carla, thank you so much for coming on and for sharing your knowledge and for just being a joy. I love how you put the joy of imperfect love because you are a joy to talk to. I knew the moment you popped on the screen before we actually recorded this that you were going to be a joy to talk to, and you have been a joy to talk to.
Well, thank you, Melissa. So have you been. I so appreciate you. And my thanks to you and your listeners.
So, guys, I will put in the show notes everywhere where you can find Dr. Carla, as well as links to not only The Joy of Imperfect Love, but all her other books. So that way, if you want to grab some other books, you can. And until next time, keep chatting. And remember, love is messy, but it's worth it. And it's imperfect. Bye.
Bye.